It was a regular Friday night, and my friends and I were looking for a place to bowl. Our usual spot was packed, so we decided to try an older alley that none of us had been to before. It had reopened recently after being closed for a few years. From the outside, the place didn't look like much. The neon sign flickered constantly, casting dull light on the cracked pavement of the parking lot, which had maybe 3 or 4 cars scattered around. The building itself looked worn down, with faded paint and dusty windows. But we weren't picky. We just wanted to bowl and hang out. When we walked in, the inside wasn't much better. It had an outdated look, the kind that hadn't been touched since the 80s. Old, sticky carpets, faded posters on the walls, and a faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. We shrugged it off, figuring it was all part of the experience. We got our shoes, found a lane, and started our game, trying to make the best of it. The place was unusually quiet for a Friday night, which struck us as odd. Usually, bowling alleys are lively with the sound of pins crashing and people chatting, but here, it was almost too quiet. There were only a couple of other groups around, mostly older folks who seemed like regulars. They weren't loud, just minding their own business. The lighting was dim, which added to the strange atmosphere. The few overhead lights that were still working flickered occasionally, and the whole place felt sort of forgotten. It wasn't what we were used to, but we figured it was just an old alley, trying to keep going. As we started bowling, I noticed a man sitting a few lanes down from us. He looked to be in his 50s with graying hair and a serious expression on his face. He wasn't bowling or talking to anyone, just sitting there, watching. It was weird because most people at least come with friends or try to get a lane. But this guy was just sitting by himself, not doing much of anything. I pointed it out to Jake, who glanced over and shrugged, saying the guy was probably waiting for someone. But something about him felt off. As the night went on, I couldn't help but feel the man's eyes on us. Every time I stood up to take my turn, I'd look over, and sure enough, he'd be staring. Not just a casual glance, but full-on staring, unblinking and unmoving. It was hard not to notice. I tried to ignore it at first, but after a while, it became too obvious. Even when Jake or Lauren bowled, he'd keep watching us, his eyes following our every move. "What's with that guy?" Lauren asked, whispering as she leaned over to me. I told her I wasn't sure, but it was starting to creep me out too. We all felt it. The alley was already quiet, but with this guy just sitting there staring, it felt like we were being watched the whole time. I was trying to brush it off as nothing, but the longer it went on, the stranger it felt. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we all knew something wasn't right. Things got worse when the ball returned on our lane jammed halfway through our game. Lauren had just rolled her ball when it disappeared halfway down the lane and didn't come back. We waited for a few minutes, but it never showed up. Frustrated, Jake walked over to the front counter to tell the guy working there. The employee barely looked up from his phone, muttering something about that lane always acting up before going back to whatever he was doing. It was like he didn't care at all. Jake came back, shaking his head, annoyed at how little the staff seemed to care. "They're not even going to fix it," he said. "This place is a joke." We all agreed. The staff didn't seem interested in helping, and the weird vibe from the staring man was making the night worse by the minute. We switched to a different lane, hoping to finish our game quickly and get out of there. As we moved to the next lane, I made the mistake of making direct eye contact with the man for the first time. His eyes were dark and expressionless, and his face was blank. He didn't smile, didn't nod, he just kept staring, as if I wasn't even a person. My stomach twisted in discomfort, and I quickly looked away, pretending like it didn't bother me, but it did. He hadn't moved once the entire time we'd been there, and something about the way he just sat there, silently watching, made my skin crawl. I didn't say anything to the others, but I could tell from the way Jake and Lauren were acting that they were feeling the same thing. The fun of bowling was completely gone now. We just wanted to finish our game and leave. By the time we were packing up to go, I glanced over again, and the man had finally moved. He stood up slowly, as if he had all the time in the world, and walked toward the exit. But even as he walked, his eyes stayed on us, like he couldn't tear himself away. His gaze was heavy, almost like he was trying to memorize us. I watched as he walked out the door without a word, disappearing into the night. The door closed behind him with a quiet thud, and the room felt colder somehow. "That was seriously messed up," Jake said, breaking the silence. None of us had any idea what that man's deal was, but the whole thing felt wrong. We hurried out of the alley, not wanting to hang around any longer than we had to. Once we were outside, we all took a breath of fresh air, trying to shake off the weirdness of the whole night. "What was up with that guy?" Lauren asked, sounding as rattled as I felt. We all agreed that the man staring had made the night uncomfortable, and the way the staff didn't care about anything only added to the strangeness. The place felt like it was stuck in time, like it hadn't had a normal crowd in years. We decided on the spot that we wouldn't come back here again. The old forgotten bowling alley wasn't worth the strange feeling it left us with. We drove home in silence, all of us lost in thought, replaying the night in our heads. A few days later, I mentioned the experience to a coworker, just to see if they had ever heard anything about the alley. When I told him where we'd gone, his face changed. "That place?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That alley's got a bad history. It used to be the kind of place people went to cause trouble. There were fights, and one time, I think someone even got stabbed there. They shut it down for a few years after that." His words hit me hard. It made sense now, the uncaring staff, the strange atmosphere, and especially the man who had been watching us all night. Maybe he was a regular from back in those rough days, someone who had seen too much and hadn't moved on. Or maybe he was just one of the troublemakers who still hung around, waiting for something to happen. Looking back, I'm grateful we left when we did. I don't know who that man was or why he was so focused on us, but I have no doubt that we did the right thing by getting out of there. Sometimes it's not about what people do. It's about the way they act when they think no one's paying attention. That night taught me to trust my instincts, especially when something feels off. We've been to plenty of bowling alleys since then, but I always make sure to keep an eye on the people around us, just in case. You never know who might be watching.